Today on the Bourbon Bytes podcast, whiskey is getting weird with Costco Hot Dog Bourbon, Knob Creek's Blenders Edition, experimental Buffalo Trace drops, and ultra premium Angel's Envy. Then I have a bite-sized review of Ardbeg 10 Cask Strength, which may prove that weirder's not always better. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bourbon Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Clifton, and this is the week of April 9th, 2026. Sorry for missing last week's episode. I was starting a new job on that day, and I figured I should probably focus on that before dedicating time to a podcast. But this week, I'm back on schedule. I'm ramping up in that new job, and I've found the time to record an episode, so thank you for your patience. But as you heard in the intro, today's getting weird. We have a lot of different bourbons and whiskeys that are experimental in so many different types of ways. So I'm going to dive right into it with this news. The first of which is probably the most trending I've ever seen a bottle of whiskey, at least in recent memory. This is the new Costco Rare Character Bourbon. You've probably seen the photos circulating around social media, but it is a hot dog bourbon. Now, of course, there's no actual hot dog water in this bourbon, but it is a pick of Rare Character Bourbon called I Got That Dog in Me. And yes, it has a photo of the $1.50 hot dog special that Costco is known for. Now, this is a single barrel select from Washington, D.C. Costco's, so it's not available nationwide, but I think they might change their mind on that because this thing is blowing up and it's already hit the secondary market like crazy. So this is a 11-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey coming in at 126.1 proof. And this is really a $90 bottle. And I see people saying that's high. I guess if you don't know bourbon, that sounds high. Because $90 for an 11-year Kentucky bourbon sounds pretty darn good to me. Now, this was limited to one bottle per Costco membership. So they knew it was going to be a bit of a rare release, but I don't think they realized how big of a following this would have. This bottle is actually going for over $500 right now on the secondary market. So it just proves that a good label can really make the secondary market of a bottle shoot up. I mean, I would love to have it. I love me some Costco hot dogs, and I love me some Rare Character. So I think that this is a really good sign for Rare Character in general. You know, I don't think they have this big following outside of those that are really embedded in the bourbon community and know how good it is. So I think it's a big win for the brand. And, you know, I definitely would try me some hot dog bourbon. Now, if it was made with hot dog water, you know what? I'd probably still try it. Let's be real. Well, sticking to the weird, you guys actually let me know about this. I had no idea it existed. Knob Creek has introduced a new series called Blenders Edition. This is a limited edition release, and it's going to become a series in the Knob Creek lineup. They say that this was born from the passion, precision, and devoted pursuit of bold flavor that defines Knob Creek, and showcases the artistry and deliberate decisions that shape the unique flavor experience in each release. So this very first bourbon in this series is dedicated to being a sweeter flavor profile. So it was specifically blended to bring out the vanilla sweetness and mouth-coating fruit and caramel, followed by a long and soft finish. Freddie No actually had a quote in this article on Southern Living. He says, "The Blenders Edition series is about slowing down and discovering the story each blend tells, with unique and new experience in each edition of the series. It's thanks to the passion and precision of our blending team who have uncovered the nuanced flavors you taste in Knob Creek Blenders Edition 01. So this one was aged at least 10 years old. It's going to be bottled at 106 proof, and it is available now for $45. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't quite hit my area yet. I'm seeing it start to trickle into a few stores in Northern California, so I have a good feeling this is going to come here sooner rather than later. Obviously, I will get a bottle of it to review because you guys know I'm a huge Knob Creek fan. I've heard some mixed things. I've heard it's like really sweet, and people that love Knob Creek don't necessarily go for a really sweet flavor profile. At least I don't. I prefer the more darker, oaky, rich flavors of a Knob Creek, but I absolutely would give it a try. It makes me wonder what these other Blenders editions are going to be in the future. You know, this one might be a little off-putting to some people because it's sweet, but maybe in the future, they're going to go for more maybe oak forward or even some older flavor profiles. Maybe they'll do like a Blenders edition that's minimum 14 or 15-year-old Knob Creek. That would be incredible. Bring us back to the old days. And I will let you know what I think when I get my hands on a bottle. All right, we're keeping it weird because Buffalo Trace just released two new experimental whiskeys. One of these is the Single Oak Project, which has been a thing for 27 years at Buffalo Trace, but now they're turning it into a permanent whiskey line. So it'll be launching as an ongoing series, starting with whiskey aged in barrels from a specific section of oak trees. They were looking at different variables that affected whiskey across the barrels. You know, the mash bill, entry proof, staves, wood grain, char. They've done a lot of experiments with this. They do say this is going to be an ongoing release. It looks like it's going to be available at the Buffalo Trace gift shop in a 375 milliliter bottle for a retail price of $75. So this first bottle is going to be considered an inaugural release of the new Single Oak line. So let me tell you about that bottle. It is a rye bourbon mash bill. It is an entry proof of 125. The oak was harvested exclusively from the bottom halves of the trees, 8 years old and bottled at 90 proof. I think the only downside is the fact that it's being bottled at 90 proof. I mean, this sounded like a really great and cool release, but $75 for a 375 at 90 proof, you know, it's not something that I would grab, but it might be a good start to some incredible experimentation in the future. But like I said, they have two new experimental releases. The other is part of their experimental collection. It is the 28th edition of this, and it is a 15-year-old low entry proof wheated bourbon. So this was barreled at 105 proof, which is in contrast to the typical 114 proof that Buffalo Trace apparently uses. They say it was inspired by pre-prohibition whiskeys, which generally entered the barrel below 110 proof. And they say that this release is batched from just 13 barrels that were aged for a minimum of 15 years on the first floor of Warehouse H. Now, it's a little disconcerting. It says the final product was then chill filtered before bottling at 107 proof. That's kind of strange because what's the point of chill filtering something that high proof? It doesn't necessarily make sense. Usually you do that for lower proof whiskeys, but chill filtering at 107 proof? I don't know, that's a little strange, especially since this is an experimental release for bourbon aficionados. But the price of this, not too bad. $47 for a 375 milliliter bottle. It's going to be available at the Buffalo Trace Distillery gift shop. I think, with this being such an older aged Buffalo Trace and the unique entry proof, that's way more interesting to me than the Single Oak Project, at least this particular release of it. All right, last piece of news is still a little bit strange and weird. Angel's Envy is releasing its first age-stated rye whiskey and a Cask Strength bourbon that was made using the Solera process. Let's start with the Cask Strength rye, though. It is a 10-year-old version of Angel's Envy rye. It's actually the brand's first age-stated rye, and it's still finished in the rum cask, just like regular Angel's Envy rye, but with quite a bit more age and higher proof. So normally Angel's Envy rye comes in at 100 proof, but this one's coming in at 55.8% ABV. So it's a blend of barrels aged from 10 years and 2 months to 12 years and 4 months. And of course includes the secondary maturation in Caribbean rum casks. Now, this is going to be a very pricey bottle. It's going to come in at $270. Yikes. Older high proof rye is one of my favorite whiskeys. My problem with that is you can get 10-year-old rye from, let's say, Indiana for a fraction of that price. Now, I know Angel's Envy rye is, some people, consider it one of their favorite ryes. It's very sweet, especially with that rum finish. Others think of it as more of as a dessert pour. To me, it wasn't really a favorite of mine. And I don't know if making it, 10-year age statement, I don't know the actual age, so I don't know if it's 5 years older or whatever, but also only 10 proof points higher. I don't think it's going to make me like it anymore. But if you are a fan of their rye and you love it, this might be a worthwhile investment to pick up, or at least try. See if it is worth that price over the original. Because remember, the original Angel's Envy rye is about $90. So you're paying almost 3 times the price for a 10-year version of it. Now, let's talk about the bourbon. So this is a Cask Strength bourbon. Previously, this was a 10-year-old bottle, but this year it is not. It's going to be barrels aged from 6 years and 11 months to 12 years and 3 months. So minimum age of 6 years. And now there's a secondary maturation in ruby port barrels from 4 months to 39 months for the bourbon. And this was going to be bottled at 58.9% ABV, so a little bit higher than the rye. And a price of $250. Now, the reason that this isn't as old as the release from last year is that one actually consisted of mostly sourced bourbon, but with the 2026 release, it's actually mostly made up of Angel's Envy's own distillate. It says about 3/4 of it is their own distillate. Now, the rest of it is where the Solera aging comes into factor. So what they're doing is they're blending in The Cask Strength releases from 2023, 2024, and 2025, which were each rebarreled at the time of the release, and they're blending that into this 2026 release. So this is kind of like a compilation of what they've done in the past, but using more of their own actual distillate to kind of round it out and build up the bulk of it. I think that's more interesting to me than the rye, just because I think their bourbon is actually better than the rye. I like the port finish on it. Pricing still a bit high, 6 years old minimum. I mean, yeah, it does have up to 12-year-old in it, but $250, I don't know. It's just, I like Angel's Envy. I just think that they're overpriced for what they are. But if you guys are fans, let me know how these are. Maybe they are an exception. All right, well, we are done with the weird. Thank you guys for bearing with me. I just thought it was kind of funny that all of these stories had a strange experimental component to them. But now we're going to get back to the basics because we're going to be reviewing a new committee release of Ardbeg that actually is far less strange than anything else we've talked about today. So let's go ahead and get into our bite-sized review. All right, so this year's Ardbeg committee release is actually pretty darn simple. It is a cask strength edition of their Ardbeg 10. So there's no additional finishing here. It's just straight up Ardbeg 10 released at cask strength. So this one that I have right here is 61.7% ABV. So that's 123.4 proof, which is pretty crazy high for an Ardbeg. I'm really excited to give this a try. I usually go for more of their sherry finished or, things like Ugadal or Korryvaken. Those are kind of more my flavor profile with Ardbeg. But I think this is a really good, fun release. Especially for fans of just straight up Ardbeg 10. It's probably their most popular product in their lineup, so getting a chance to try a cask strength is exciting. It says this is the committee's most wanted. For over a quarter of a century, the famous Ardbeg committee has sipped, savored, and sworn by it. The iconic Ardbeg 10 years old, but the whiskey on everyone's lips, the very same at cask strength. The most talked about release in the distillery's modern history, finally bottled at your impassioned request. It says, drawn straight from American oak barrels, 10's revered peaty paradox is pronounced with rich aromas of smoke and sea spray, giving way to smooth, natural sweetness. I am very excited to give this a try. It's my first whiskey of the day, so this should be pretty interesting. I don't usually jump straight into peat, and I certainly don't jump into cask strength peat, but that's what we're going to do for today's episode. So I picked this up for $90 at my local liquor store, and I think that's a very fair price. Regular Ardbeg 10 comes in close to $60, so it's really not that much of a premium to get it at cask strength, especially since Ardbeg 10 is only 46% ABV, so we're taking a huge leap up in proof. Let me give it a nose. Oop, yep, that's Ardbeg. Very intensely peaty, but a very natural smokiness to it. I don't know what I was expecting. I think, Ardbeg sometimes goes a little bit of that like medicinal, not quite Lefroy levels of peat, but this is almost like a hickory smoke, I'm a barbecue lover, and this does remind me of a good smoky barbecue. Surprisingly bright, too. It's sweet, it's a little bit citrusy, but man, a peat bomb for sure. With this being so intense, I would almost say, add a few drops of water, but the whole point of this release is to try Ardbeg at cask strength. So we're not going to do that here today. I'm just going to say it's a really bold, intense nose, sweet, surprisingly bright and citrusy, but a heck of a lot of smoke. So let's go ahead and give this a taste. I'm really curious to see how that holds up on the palate. Cheers. Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, that's so nice. That is incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's everything that I love about Ardbeg, but very, very pure. Like I said, I like the Korryvaken and the Ugadal, which are different finishes on it. But this is just straight up really good distillate. And that 10-year age statement, I mean, this is a really refined whiskey. It's intense, but it's sweet. And honestly, really approachable if you like peat. Obviously, if you're not a peat fan, you're not going to grab this bottle. But it really has just a really well-balanced, well-rounded mouthfeel and just flavor profile. Yeah, it has like a bit of spice that's surprising. And I don't know if that's necessarily coming from the proof. It could be. But there's a bit of like a spicy, like a spicy pepper kind of note. Not like black pepper, but more like an actual like capsaicin, like, that spicy chemical from a pepper. A little bit of that lingering on the tongue. It doesn't like get the back of the throat, but it definitely hits the front of the palate. Then as it works its way across your palate, it gets sweeter and richer. almost like a, I don't know if this is a thing, but like a smoked vanilla. It has those really dark, rich, French vanilla notes, but it has a layer of smoke that's just kind of sitting on top of it, and it works really, really well. It's been quite a while since I've had regular Ardbeg 10, but I really don't remember loving it this much. I think the extra proof really gives this the oomph that I think that needed. And finish-wise, it's equally as long as it is intense. It almost has like a smoked pepper note, like a chipotle pepper a bit on the back end. I'm still getting that consistent pepperiness, which isn't something I typically find on Ardbeg, but it's really showing up here on the palate. But with that, it's got a bit of a mellow, smooth, just smokiness that just follows it all the way down. It honestly reminds me of smoking a cigar, which is something I don't do often. I usually only smoke cigars when I'm with some whiskey friends, maybe at a meetup or something. But it kind of has that kind of lingering, just like warm, smoky feeling on the back end of the palate that kind of reminds me of smoking a cigar. Overall, wow, this is probably one of my favorite Ardbeg releases ever. Dare I say? It just works in so many ways. It's got a great age statement, a great proof, and it keeps it simple. It's not weird. It's very straightforward, good cask strength Islay whiskey, and I'm a big fan of this. So when it comes to score, I like to just give this one score overall: proof, availability, price, palate, nose, everything combined. And this really is hard to knock. I think the only thing holding this back is availability, right? This is a committee release. They are very, very limited. I think if this were a regular addition to the lineup, this would probably get a top score for me. I mean, it's fantastic. I think the price of $90 to $100 is perfect, especially when the regular Ardbeg 10 is close to $60. I think that increase in proof is well worth the price, and the complexity here is really unmatched. So I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. I seriously love this. This is a contender for top whiskey of 2026 for me. It would be a 10 out of 10, honestly, if it was a regular release. But since it is so limited, I haven't been able to find a backup bottle of it yet. Because I guarantee you, if I see one, I'm going to buy it. Wow, they've really outdone themselves. I see why this has been a much requested release, and I think this is going to be a fan favorite for sure. So if you see it, get it. Definitely don't pass it up, especially if you love Ardbeg in any sense. This is probably one of the best expressions I've had from their lineup. So with all that being said, what do you prefer? The weird, wacky, experimental whiskey releases like we had in the news stories, or a new take on an old classic like this Ardbeg 10 Cask Strength? Let me know what you think on our Discord community. You can find that at bourbonbytes.com, along with merch, ways to join and support the channel in our Byte Club, and everywhere you want to follow me on the web. All right, well, that does it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to leave a thumbs up if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow me on wherever you get your podcasts. If you can leave a review, that does help out the podcast a lot. And of course, remember, I go live on YouTube every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. So I hope to see you there. But with that, this has been the Bourbon Bytes podcast, a whiskey podcast with a gaming twist. Cheers, and I'll talk to you guys next episode.